now had a customer. And then I left from there and went down to the Gibbs Wire and Steel Company in Southington, Connecticut, who was a supplier of the kind of steel that we needed. And I walked in there to see Mr. Gibbs, and I said to him, I'm Alex Rankin, I'm starting a spring company, and I would like you to be my supplier. Will you give me credit? And he said, what do you need? And I said, $2,000 for 60 days. He said, okay. And I ordered the steel. So I was in business in one day. And then I went back and picked up the machine with, at that time I think I had a Volkswagen, a company car. Anyhow, I borrowed Pearson's station wagon, and we put the machine in there, and the machine weighed about 1,000 pounds, and that baby went right down on the axle. we got it home, and fortunately they were building a new house next to us, so we had cinder blocks to kind of unload that machine on top of the cinder blocks. And then I took the machine apart piece by piece and brought it down the basement and put it back together again and started modifying that machine to make the springs. And it was, and we did that, and we shipped the 300 springs on October 31st. I didn't ship them, I took them up to Hasbro, and they didn't have a lot of quality control things. They just put it on the line, and if the dial talked, it was good. And so they put them on the line, and all of them talked, and they talked perfectly. And I got the order for 10,000 springs, and I was in business. Wow. And that's how it started. Now, why did that little old man come in? Well, 6 months before, he had come down to the Hunter Spring Company to find out why they were not able to make enough springs to keep them running at G.I. Joe. And he wasn't very well dressed, and everybody pegged him as an expediter. And I didn't. I thought he was from Hasbro. I didn't know who he was, but I treated him like he was the president of Hasbro, and I tried to do that with everybody. Anyhow, I showed him how the machines worked and what the problems were, and that the real major problem was getting enough steel and things like that. And introduced him to everybody, and then took him for lunch and put him back on the train to Pawtucket, Rhode Island. Well, this little man happened to be vice president of all manufacturing for Hasbro. That's why you're very careful how you treat everybody that you meet. Now things are going well. And in Hasbro, I started making the springs, and I figured out how to get steel when the other companies couldn't. They were always wanted large coils of steel, but when they made the steel, it was only 2.5 thousandths thick, this spring, and so that's thinner than a human hair. And so it was a very specialized steel. But sometimes they had smaller coils that were too big to throw out, and not big enough to sell. And I would go to the warehouses of the steel suppliers with my micrometer and go through these dusty closets and say, I'll take that coil, and I'll take that coil, and I'll take that coil, and so on. And then I'd have them slit to size at the Gibbs company, and I was keeping them running when the other companies couldn't, because of that effort. Well, you had to drive way up into Massachusetts to some of the places, and I did that. I was young and full of energy at that time. Today I wouldn't drive that far at all. Anyhow, I was supplying about 80% of the springs to keep G.I. Joe running, to the point that some days I would put the box of springs on the front seat of the Hemingway truck, so that when it got to Pawtucket, Rhode Island overnight, that was the first thing unloaded from that truck. It wasn't even put in the back of the truck. And so we kept them running, and this gets to be a little sticky now, in that one thing happened that you don't recognize. This was in 1967. In 68, two things happened. And it was Bobby Kennedy and Martin Luther King were shot. And G.I. Joe was pulled off the market because he carried a gun. Now, I didn't understand that. When I grew up, we had rubber guns, we had squirt guns, and all kinds of guns. But they decided that because those two were shot, that kids shouldn't have guns. And G.I. Joe was off the market for one whole year as he was reconfigured as an adventure doll and didn't carry a gun. Now he's back with a gun. But then now I had steel that I had to pay for. Hasbro didn't want any more parts, and they wouldn't pay, they only paid me for parts, and I was kind of in trouble, and things got pretty thin. And so because I had traveled with the other salesmen, I knew that there was a company in northern New Jersey, and they made ladies' hair dryers. The hood that goes over your head in a beauty parlor goes up and down. Well, one of our springs counterbalances that hood. And I went to see Lou Honig, who was there, and I asked him to have lunch with me, and I told him that I'd like to talk to him about making that spring for him. And he normally doesn't have lunch with anybody, but he decided that day that if I went up there, he would have lunch with me. And I got the order that day. So now I started much heavier steel and so on, but I had the machine that could handle that. And I was making springs for ladies' hair dryers that we still make to this day. Anytime you sit under one, we're the guy that keeps it up there for you. So that was, I started going there, and then the next customer was fire dampers for buildings to keep the fire from going through the building in the duct system. And it slams shut if there's any temperature. Well, today it's all done with smoke, because smoke kills you before the fire. And we make millions of springs now every year for fire dampers, and we ship them to Qatar and all over the world for that operation in the buildings. But everything was going well, and I got a call from the buyer at Hasbro, and he said, "Hey, Mr. Rankin, how would you like 90% of the business?" And I said, "Well, I think I deserve it because I've kept it running when nobody else could." He said, "No, I don't mean that. We'd make an arrangement where you would take 5% of your profit and put it in a brown paper bag and drop it in the back of my car on the Connecticut Turnpike." And I didn't know what to do. I am not going to go into a business and start off paying people off. It's not good. And so I called my lawyer friend and I said, "What do I do?" He says, "Well, you got to make a recording of this meeting." And I had told him, I said, "I can't make this arrangement to talk about it on the phone. Let's meet." And the toy show was in New York at that time, and so we agreed to meet in a hotel just outside of New York in New Jersey for dinner and about 6:30. And so I was, "What do I do?" And I said, "I don't want to put a voice or recorder in my briefcase. It's too obvious." So I called private detective agencies, and I found a recorder that was about maybe 4 or 5 inches high and about 3 inches wide and 1 inch thick. And it ran for an hour on a tape, and it had a microphone with a switch on it, so you could remotely turn it on and off. And it was a tie class, and it looked like a big microphone. So where do you put the microphone? and I stuck it inside my coat as close to the sleeve as I could, and put the microphone there. And then I met with him. Then we're in a bar, and the guys are telling jokes. It was a salesman from the toy show, and they're having a nice time. And when be quiet, I say, "Could you just tell me again? I can hear you better now if you talk a little louder." And he explained the whole thing to me. Now, before that, I forgot to put this in when I was with Pearson. He said, "You've got to ask Mr. Sam Gilbert what to do. Don't tell him after the fact. Ask him before." It was 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And I called Hasbro and got right through to him. And he said, "I don't believe you." He said, "This man, we're training him to be our director of all purchases in Hasbro, and I don't think he would do something like that." I said, "I have no reason to tell you this story. I'm making springs for you. You like the springs. Our prices are right. I'm making a decent profit. Everything is working. Why would I do this? And there is no reason." And it turns out, he said, "Okay, I'll tell you what, you go through and get this recording." I told him I could do that. He said, "I'll come down to your house and listen to it, and then we'll decide what to do." And I did get the recording, and it was not a nice night. This fellow wanted to show me New York from one bar to another, and I just I spilled a lot of drinks. I got rid of them. But anyhow, towards the end of the evening, he's going down into a real seedy area of New York, and he said, "I don't come into this area without a friend." I said, "Well, I appreciate that. I agree with everything he said." And he said, "No, not you. This is my friend." And I looked down, and there's a pistol on the seat next to me, and I thought, "Oh, gee, there goes a hole in my $100 recorder." I got very tired, very sick, and I said, "I'm sure my wife is waiting for me." And I said, "I got to go home." And I went home. I got home about 2 o'clock in the morning, and the tape had gone through. And the next day we listened to it, and it was not good. It wasn't, but you could get the gist of the thing. I mean, he spelled it out as to how I was working with several people in the Hasbro organization. And so I called Mr. Urbach, Mr. Gilbert, and he came down to the house and listened to the thing, and I said, "What do I do?" He said, "Just act as though everything's normal, but do not make any deal with him. Just say you're working with the IRS or whatever it is as to how to hide this money." And so I did, and they monitored what he was doing, and they found 4 other companies that were paying him off, and they were all blacklisted with Hasbro, and some of them were large companies where they supplying the cardboard and everything for their games. So that was the first item, and I got hit by this 2 other times, because as a sole owner, you control everything. There was nobody else that I had to report to. If I wanted to pay somebody off, I could do it. And I didn't want to get involved in that. If I was going to have a business, it was going to be an honest business, or there'd be no business. And so then I was in fire dampers, and the next one that came along was from Sam Metty and Sherwin Tarnoff in Chicago, who wanted me to give them phony invoices. And I said, "I've got to give you an invoice if I sell you springs. If I deliver springs, you get an invoice." "No, we just want the invoice." And I didn't understand why, but they kind of explained. They didn't explain it at the time, but what they were doing was selling the company, and they were kiting how much inventory was in there so they'd get a higher price. And they were selling it to INA. And I said, "I can't do that." And so I lost 30% of the business. 30% of our business at that time with that answer won't do it. And as it turned out, they got an injunction to go through our books at Vulcan Spring to find out if we were part of that scam. And we were clean. And Metty and Tarnoff went to jail. We didn't. And as a result, the business has grown, and today we make probably maybe 20,000 different springs. They're all custom made. None of them are exactly the same. They look the same and everything, but they got different loads and all that sort of thing in there. And we probably got 2,000 customers all over the world. We ship to all through Asia. We have 2 full-time salesmen in China, and we're shipping springs into China all the time. A lot of springs, skids of them. And Australia, across Canada, the United States, South America, you name it. And that's where the Vulcan Spring is today, and that's how it started. I then since gotten into the banking business, and the reason I got into that is I was always on the wrong side of the desk. I wanted to see what the guy on the other side of the desk was thinking. And I learned that. And then we went into the Amazing Grace, which has been a marvelous experience. It's cost a few bucks, I'll tell you that, but it's been worthwhile. So thank you for listening to me today. Are there any questions? Yes?
Questions? I saw Amazing Grace, and I agree with you. I loved it. And where is it going to be in this area now? It's closed on Broadway.
Well, at this particular time, right now, this week, it is running in Nairobi, Kenya.
I'm sorry.
They have a reason to go.
It is, there, we sent 3 people over there, 2 photographers to see where it was going, how it was going, and then one of the actresses. And we sent Anna over, who was the slave for Mary Catlett in the show. But I keep getting pictures back. It's at a Catholic school there that they're running this. And this Catholic school has had one of their students, the theater is big for them apparently. One of the students came here and she has gotten a Tony for 12 Years a Slave, I think was the name of the show that she was in. And she has agreed now to translate this thing for us when it comes back here. We'll have everything ready to go. Thank you.
You can't go away, so I'm just giving you a present.
Okay.
And there's no strings attached.
No strings attached. I don't have to pay you off.
No!
And I didn't.
Thank you. Thank you. Great, great.